Wealth promises control, the ability to shape one's environment, to purchase the best care, and to ensure that resources never limit options. Yet, the women who inherited America's greatest fortunes discovered that all the money in the world cannot protect against the fundamental human vulnerabilities that visit everyone regardless of bank balance. Mental illness, grief, and the specific trauma of fearing that no one would love you if the fortune disappeared are inescapable. Their responses to this powerlessness took many forms. Years of psychoanalysis cost millions without producing healing. Withdrawal into private worlds, where dolls replaced people offered solace, for dolls demanded nothing and betrayed no one. Lifelong struggles with fathers whose legacies overshadowed every achievement, and whose ghosts' money could neither summon nor banish, left indelible marks on their lives. Inheritance revealed itself as both a burden and a blessing. Extreme wealth created its own species of suffering, and even the costliest treatments money could buy sometimes left them broken. Today, we honor the women who learned that billions cannot purchase sanity, cannot guarantee companionship, and cannot erase the haunting question of who they might be without the fortunes that defined and, at times, destroyed them. Barbara Hutton, heiress to the Woolworth fortune, exemplifies the tragic intersection of immense wealth and personal suffering. On a crisp November evening in 1930, as the Great Depression ravaged the nation, New York City's elite gathered at the Ritz-Carlton to celebrate her 18th birthday. The guests, representing families such as the Ayers, Vanderbilts, Whitneys, and Rockefellers, were welcomed by Maurice Chevalier, a French entertainer whimsically costumed as Santa Claus. The grand ballroom shimmered with extravagant decorations and a sea of flowers valued at $50,000, nearly $1 million today. Melodies from 4 orchestras filled the room, while 200 waiters served 2,000 bottles of champagne. As midnight approached, the feast intensified with 107 course suppers and 1,000 breakfasts for those who danced through the night. Each guest received a jewelry case filled with unmounted diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, a testament to Hutton's generosity. The celebration, reportedly costing over $60,000, more than $100 million today, showcased Barbara herself as the radiant centerpiece, embodying the poor little rich girl persona that would follow her throughout her life. That night marked Barbara Hutton's grand entrance into high society, a dazzling public debut, foreshadowing a life of glamour, heartache, and the relentless pursuit of happiness amidst the glittering, yet unforgiving world of the wealthy. Born on November 14, 1912, in New York City, Barbara Woolworth Hutton was the only child of Edna Woolworth of the retail empire and Franklin Laws Hutton, co-founder of E.F. Hutton & Co. By the age of 12, she inherited a staggering fortune from her grandmother, Jenny Woolworth, totaling $26 million, equivalent to nearly $500 million today. Her mother's estate added $1 million in stocks, further managed by her father, growing to $42 million by her 21st birthday. Her father, a financial titan, safeguarded her fortune with strategic investments, but the family environment was far from nurturing. The mysterious death of her mother, believed to be connected to Franklin's infidelities, left young Barbara traumatized. Her father's remarriage to Irene Bode deepened her emotional isolation, and Barbara spent much of her childhood shuffled among relatives and governesses. Barbara's entry into society was spectacular. Her debutante ball legendary, symbolizing a life steeped in luxury, yet devoid of emotional security. She acquired sumptuous estates worldwide, from the Japanese-inspired Sumio in Mexico to the regal city, Hosni in Tangier. Her collection of jewelry, including the Vladimir tiara, and her wardrobe, featuring couture from Cristobal Balenciaga and Oleg Cassini, underscored her extravagant lifestyle. Socially, she became a magnet for high-profile events, but her visibility drew media scrutiny and public critique, especially during the Great Depression. By 1934, her life inspired both film and song, cementing her as a cultural icon. Yet, despite wealth and fame, Barbara Hutton ended her life lonely and nearly penniless. Her personal life was tumultuous, marked by 7 marriages, each ending in disappointment. Her first marriage to Prince Alexis Medavani in 1933 dissolved after less than 2 years. Her second marriage to Count Kurt Heinrich Eberhard Erdmann Georg Hardenberg Reventlow produced her only child, Lance Revent, in 1936, but ended by 1941. Subsequent unions with Hollywood actor Cary Grant, Prince Igor Trubetskoy, Dominican diplomat Pifio Rubio Rosa, German tennis star Baron Gottfried von Kram, and Prince Pierre Raymond Douan Vin Nashampasak all failed, leaving Barbara in perpetual search of stability and love. Her wealth made her both a target for exploitation and a subject of constant media fascination. But lasting happiness eluded her. By the 1960s and 1970s, Barbara faced financial ruin and declining health. Her extravagant lifestyle, combined with costly marriages and poor financial management, steadily depleted her fortune. Health struggles, compounded by addiction to barbiturates and alcohol, led to near-fatal overdoses, paranoia, and reclusiveness. The death of her only son in a 1972 plane crash deepened her despair. She spent her final years largely bedridden, blind, and dependent on staff, her remaining fortune a mere fraction of its former glory. Barbara Hutton passed away from a heart attack on May 11, 1979, at the age of 66, her funeral subdued and attended by a close circle of family and friends. A stark contrast to the lavish celebrations that once defined her life. The experiences of women like Barbara Hutton demonstrate that inherited wealth is as much a burden as a blessing. Money solves material problems, but cannot fulfill emotional needs. It can create daughters who either conform to dynasties they never chose or rebel against fortunes that feel more like obligations than freedoms. Edith Rockefeller McCormick, born in 1872, as the third child of oil titan John D. Rockefeller, exemplified this struggle. Raised in a household of strict financial discipline and rationed pleasure, she defied expectations by investing millions in experimental psychology, abandoning her family for 8 years in Zurich, and returning as a self-proclaimed Jungian healer who studied horoscopes, dreams, and cosmic destinies. Her radical transformations made her both pioneer and pariah, and by the time breast cancer claimed her life, in 1932 at age 60, her famed emeralds had been sold, her estate in decline, and her debts exceeding what remained of her fortune. Inherited wealth carries both privilege and profound responsibility. It can illuminate lives with glamour and opportunity, but also deepen isolation, magnify vulnerability, and expose the human heart to suffering that no amount of money can cure. A Rockefeller who died as a debtor rather than an heiress demonstrates how even the greatest fortunes can vanish when personal vision outpaces financial prudence. An estimated $5 million spent on Jungian patronage, ruinous divorce litigation, and poorly timed real estate ventures transformed one of America's richest daughters into a cautionary tale. Even a Rockefeller fortune could evaporate when treated as fuel for private transformation rather than capital to preserve. Edith's earliest years unfolded in a Cleveland household where Standard Oil quietly transformed her father into one of the wealthiest and most vilified men in America. The family operated more like a strict religious mission than a gilded playground. Her mother, Laura Spelman Rockefeller, enforced moral discipline so rigorously that family letters read almost like sermons. The children kept careful ledgers of their spending, confessed even small misdeeds, and were taught that their father's fortune was a sacred trust requiring sobriety, self-control, and public respectability. For a sensitive, imaginative girl like Edith, this created deep internal conflict. She absorbed the Rockefeller code of order, thrift, and charitable purpose, yet also hungered for beauty, music, and intellectual freedom that did not fit neatly inside Baptist austerity. Observers later noted that she was the child most openly restless under this regime, fascinated early by European culture and languages, showing little interest in the practical business habits her father tried to instill. That tension between a fortune built on industrial might in a household governed like a religious order eventually drove her into art, opera, Jungian psychology, and the extravagant patronage her upbringing had taught her to distrust. By age 19, she was being watched by American society and European aristocrats as one of the great prizes of Gilded Age matchmaking. In 1891, she married Harold Fowler McCormick, son of Cyrus McCormick of the Reaper fortune. The union merged two industrial empires. Harold brought Midwestern machinery wealth, Edith brought Rockefeller oil money. Together representing a new American aristocracy rooted in factories and trusts rather than old titles. Their wedding was a major society event, and their move to Chicago shifted the city's social gravity. Their combination of capital and name made them the royal couple of the Midwest elite. For Edith, Chicago offered a stage large enough to enact the cultivated, cosmopolitan identity she had always desired. With her husband increasingly absorbed by the international harvester empire, she found freedom and resources to redirect her inheritance away from the spare, strictly charitable projects her father favored, toward a personal vision for art, music, and the inner lives of modern city dwellers. Yet the McCormick marriage gradually came apart under the strain of temperament, health, and tragedy. Harold, practical and business-focused, contrasted with Edith, who gravitated toward art, ideas, and a mystical search for meaning he could not comprehend. The couple had 5 children, 2 of whom died young, losses that deepened Edith's depression, nervous exhaustion, and physical illness rather than uniting them. Over time, they shared a social universe, but increasingly separate inner lives. Harold chasing industrial schemes and aviation ventures, Edith immersing herself in culture, philanthropy, and spiritual experiments. By the early 1910s, grief, marital alienation, and chronic ill health left Edith feeling that conventional medicine and religion offered nothing. The work of Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung, with its focus on dreams, symbols, and the deeper psyche, promised the spiritual overhaul she craved. In 1913, at 41, she left her husband, children, and social position to seek intensive treatment in Zurich with Jung. This visit became an 8-year exile, in which her identity was dismantled and rebuilt around his ideas. She arrived as a wealthy, distressed patient, and became central to Jung's circle socially, financially, and intellectually. Her analysis involved sustained work with dreams, childhood memories, religious imagery, and the conflicts between her Rockefeller upbringing and her own desires. Edith's financial support extended beyond therapy. She contributed to the Zurich Psychological Society and the Psychological Club, subsidizing training, lectures, and infrastructure that helped transform Jung's practice into a global movement. She funded translations of his key works into English, opening American and British readerships. She supported James Joyce with a monthly stipend while he labored on Ulysses, at a time when his literary reputation was uncertain. Edith eventually trained as a lay analyst herself, treating wealthy Americans seeking Jungian therapy and layering astrology and reincarnation onto the Jungian framework, interpreting horoscopes alongside dreams and past lives as symbolic keys to present suffering within Jung's orbit. She was a generous benefactor and an orthodox mystic. Within her own family, she became the eccentric Rockefeller who went to Europe, fell under a doctor's influence, and did not fully return until 1921. Upon her return to Chicago, she discovered that the marriage she had left was a legal fiction, and Harold quickly pursued divorce, filing potentially explosive allegations. Negotiations were protracted and costly, untangling interlocked McCormick and Rockefeller assets, charitable ventures, and social responsibilities. By the time settlements and associated costs were tallied, Edith owed more than $800,000, a staggering sum in the early 1920s. Maintaining her lifestyle required cash she no longer had, and she had been borrowing heavily against her trust income. Eating into capital meant to sustain her for a lifetime. Her father's strategy of transferring vast portions of the Rockefeller fortune into foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and the General Education Board, brilliant for tax efficiency and long-term philanthropy, worked against her. Edith did not have unlimited liquid inheritance. She depended on trust distributions, carefully overseen by trustees loyal first to capital preservation and institutional missions. The mid-1920s brought a bruising legal fight over a $7.5 million stock dividend, with family members and Rockefeller institutions contending the windfall belonged to the trust's principal. The litigation pitted a financially pressed woman against some of the best lawyers money could buy, demonstrating that the family structures prioritized capital preservation over individual solvency. Meanwhile, Villa Turcum, her Lake Forest estate, sat as an overscaled monument to pre-war optimism, requiring constant maintenance, year-round staff, and rising taxes while generating no income. Speculative real estate ventures, funded through her Zurich connections, amounted to $17 million in architectural projects, timed disastrously as the economy slid toward the Great Depression. Projects stalled, buyers vanished, and the Rockefeller daughter discovered that institutions bearing her family's name were the most determined to deny her cash when she needed it most. By the early 1930s, Edith's finances were near bankruptcy. Years of heavy spending on opera, art, philanthropy, Jungian projects, divorce settlements, legal fees, and property-carrying costs had hollowed her fortune. The post-1929 economic collapse worsened matters, shrinking investment income and making assets impossible to liquidate at prior value. In Chicago, she tried to reinvent herself as a Jungian healer, treating dozens of patients, often charging little or nothing, effectively using remaining capital to underwrite therapy for elite clients. Gossip columnists portrayed her as the renegade Rockefeller, an imperious mystic dabbling in occultism. By 1932, breast cancer claimed her at age 60, her financial position mirroring her physical decline. Villa Turcum was unsalable and slid toward neglect, demolished in 1965. Her portable wealth, including famed emeralds, was sold off, some passing to Cartier, and eventually into the hands of socialite Barbara Hutton. Estimates attribute roughly $5 million spent over a decade on Jungian projects, with decades of giving exceeding $10 million. Without her support, Jung's organizations would have struggled to train analysts, secure premises, and reach English-speaking audiences. Civic contributions, including early Chicago Grand Opera experiments, strengthened the Art Institute's collections and donated land that became Brookfield Zoo. Edith's fortune, spent building institutions and ideas, rather than preserving capital, left a lasting cultural legacy, even as her personal finances collapsed. Her story demonstrates that wealth can become a prison, giving one's life to ideals, passions, or devotion to someone else can erase the self, leaving a person bound to obligations no money can truly fulfill. Inheriting millions often brings not only opportunity, but also the duty to prove things that money cannot prove. Helen Clayfrick's life illustrates similar burdens. Born September 2, 1888, at the Clayton Estate in Pittsburgh, she grew up haunted by the suffering of her sister Martha, who died slowly from a swallowed pin. Martha's agonizing illness and eventual death reshaped Helen's childhood, instilling trauma compounded by further loss. In 1892, baby Henry Clayfrick Jr. died within weeks, leaving Adelaide Frick, Helen's mother, hemorrhaging both blood and sanity, and adding layers of grief and psychological burden to Helen's early years. 2 days after Helen's birth, Lithuanian anarchist Alexander Berkman stormed into Henry Clayfrick's Pittsburgh office, seeking revenge for the Homestead Strike massacre that had filled Carnegie Steel's profits with workers' blood. Berkman's first shot tore through Frick's earlobe, the second pierced his neck, and a third struck the same spot as the industrialist fell. The attacker then produced a sharpened steel file, stabbing Frick 4 times in the legs and torso before office workers subdued him. Bleeding from 7 wounds, Frick waved away doctors and finished his afternoon correspondence, insisting that the company's policies would continue unchanged. 4-year-old Helen learned that day that her father was made of something harder than steel, something that could absorb bullets and blades without yielding. The assassination attempt transformed Clayton into a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the gardens where Helen had played. Servants underwent investigations that would shame modern security clearances, and every visitor was treated as a potential threat. Adelaide Frick, already fragile from losing 2 children, shattered completely, retreating into emotional absence and chronic illness. Helen watched her mother fade into pharmaceutical haze and darkened rooms, abdicating her role as companion and mother. The vacuum Adelaide left was absolute, and Henry Clayfrick abhorred vacuums as much as he abhorred unions. By age 8, Helen was reviewing her father's art acquisitions, her small fingers pointing at canvases, while dealers marveled at her precocious understanding of composition and provenance. She had been selected to replace everything Frick had lost: her sister Martha's companionship, her mother's partnership, and perhaps even the son who might have carried on his industrial empire. Clayton's halls were filled with El Grecos and Rembrandts, each masterpiece a bar in an increasingly gilded cage. The traumatized child was being molded into a daughter who would live solely to preserve her father's reputation for eternity. Henry Clayfrick's approach to child rearing mirrored his business methods. Identify the desired outcome, eliminate all obstacles, and accept no deviation. He sought a daughter who would serve as the permanent custodian of his legacy. And the primary obstacle was any personal desire or independence. Marriage was forbidden, not as a request but as a condition of existence. A decree Helen absorbed so completely that she died at 96, having never kissed anyone but her father. The prohibition was never written, never formally declared, yet it bent her life entirely into its orbit. By 17, Helen had crossed the Atlantic 9 times, visiting the Louvre and Prado with the frequency most teenagers visited local shops. Each trip was educational, preparing her to serve as a living extension of her father's vision. In Paris, she persuaded her father to purchase 2 El Grecos that would anchor his collection. She spoke fluent French, German, and Italian, read Latin and Greek, and could identify the brushstrokes of minor Renaissance masters at 50 paces. These accomplishments were not for her own enjoyment, but tools to serve her father. Like teaching a horse to perform in a single ring forever. Frick paraded Helen before other millionaires like a prized orchid, showing her off while making it clear she was not for sale, not for courting, but for reflecting his glory. She attended board meetings, witnessed contract negotiations, learned to evaluate coal deposits and steel futures. Training that suggested preparation for leadership, while ensuring she would only ever lead in his name. Adelaide drifted through these years like smoke, leaving Helen trapped between a father who demanded everything and a mother who offered nothing. The Homestead strike had made Frick one of the most despised men in America, but Helen absorbed his worldview completely. Wealth was virtue. Unions were criminal conspiracies, and any criticism of her father was an attack on natural law itself. Friends watched her mature into a woman who spoke in her father's cadences, shared his opinions on every subject, and seemed to have no interior life separate from his expectations. One visitor recalled dining at Clayton and watching Helen, then 20, defer to her father on whether she preferred Mozart to Beethoven, unable to express even musical taste without permission. Modern psychologists recognize this as coercive control, the systematic destruction of independent identity through alternating rewards and restrictions, creating a dependence so total the victim cannot imagine freedom. By the time Henry Clayfrick died in 1919, he had succeeded in creating exactly what he intended. His will granted Helen $38 million, a purpose that would consume the remaining 5 years of her life. The will favored Helen so heavily that her siblings became estranged for life. Emerging from mourning, Helen assumed the focused intensity of someone who had found a religion, except her God was her father. She founded the Frick Art Reference Library in 1920, documenting every significant artwork in the Western world, hiring photographers to travel America, capturing images of art in private homes, small museums, and municipal buildings. European agents scoured auction catalogs and scholarly publications, creating an archive that would eventually exceed 1.2 million images. The scale was megalomaniacal, pursued not out of personal passion, but as a sacred obligation. A 1920 trip through war devastated Europe transformed her worldview. Visiting the ruins of the Soissons Cathedral, she developed a profound hatred of Germans, refusing to hire German employees or acquire German art for the rest of her life. Every charitable act carried her father's invisible signature. Frick Park, donated in 1908, gave Pittsburgh's poor children outdoor access, because such experiences bonded Helen to her father. The Iron Rail Vacation Home offered respite for female textile workers, a peculiar charity for someone whose fortune derived from industries that had crushed them. Helen saw no irony, only virtue. Her service on the Frick Collections Board from 1920 to 1961 focused on acquiring works that extended her father's taste rather than reflecting her own. In 1922, the psychological weight of living for a dead man finally cracked her facade. Helen suffered a complete nervous breakdown, collapsing under the pressure of perpetuating her father's vision. Recovery meant renewed dedication to memorial building. She oversaw the construction of the Henry Clay Frick Fine Arts Building at the University of Pittsburgh, but severed ties when the university hired German professors and acquired modern art, building her own Frick Art Museum at Clayton instead. Even her 60-year devotion to the library she founded was ultimately about her father, stamping his name on every photograph. By 1965, Helen had spent 46 years constructing monuments to her father. When historian Sylvester K. Stevens wrote a few paragraphs describing Frick's ruthlessness, Helen, then 77, responded with the fury of a zealot, suing to halt distribution of his work entirely. Court depositions revealed that Helen had never read other historical accounts, living instead in a carefully constructed alternate history, where her father was purely heroic. The case dragged on for years, costing Stevens both money and health, while Helen's legal fees were negligible against her millions. Her great-niece later described Helen as a deeply wounded woman, contending with sexism and misunderstandings of abuse of power. But the reality was more profound. Helen had been psychologically conditioned to erase her capacity for independent thought or action. Helen spent nearly 8 decades and millions of dollars building museums, libraries, and parks that bore her father's name, yet could not tolerate a historian mentioning his actual deeds. She died in 1984 at Clayton, the house where her sister had screamed away 4 years of agony, where her father had survived bullets, and where her mother had faded into oblivion. She left instructions for Clayton to become yet another museum celebrating the Frick name, preserving 93% of the artifacts. Her $15.4 million estate was a fraction of her inheritance. The rest had been spent building monuments to a man historians increasingly recognized as a symbol of Gilded Age exploitation. The richest unmarried woman in America lived as a voluntary prisoner, battling anyone who suggested her father was anything less than a secular saint, dying without ever discovering who Helen Clay Frick might have been. She inherited one of America's most controversial fortunes, yet chose invisibility over celebrity, miniatures over mansions, and the controlled safety of medical walls over the unpredictable chaos of the outside world. In this episode of Old Money Allure, we examine the life of Huget Clark, heiress to a fortune so vast she owned everything, but desired nothing beyond solitude. Her childhood tragedy shaped a lifetime of reclusion, leading the richest woman in New York to choose a hospital bed over palaces worth hundreds of millions. In the spring of 1906, While San Francisco burned and America's robber barons counted their millions, Huget Marcel Clark was born in Paris. Her father, William Andrews Clark, at 67, had clawed his way from Pennsylvania poverty to become one of Montana's copper kings. His fortune, amassed through copper mines, railroads, newspapers, and real estate, was estimated at $150 million in 1907, equivalent to $3 billion today. The family's New York residence at 962 Fifth Avenue was not merely a house, but a 121-room monument to excess, complete with 30 bathrooms and features that rivaled even the Vanderbilts. Huget's mother, Anna Eugenia LaChapelle, had been William Clark's ward before becoming his second wife. 9 years younger than him, living proof that Clark collected beautiful things as obsessively as he collected copper mines. For 13 years, Huget shared this gilded world with her vivacious sister Andra, fluent in French and a skilled violinist. But in 1919, when Huget was 13, meningitis claimed Andra at 16, leaving a wound in Huget's psyche that would never heal. The family's response was grandiose. Millions were donated to establish a hospital wing, as if wealth could reverse death's verdict. When William Clark died in 1925, leaving 19-year-old Huget one of the wealthiest women in America, she and her mother abandoned the massive Fifth Avenue mansion for a modest 15,000 square foot apartment at 900 7th Avenue. The move represented the first step in Huget's gradual withdrawal from a world that had taken her sister and left her with a fortune she had never sought. At 22, she married William MacDonald Gower, a law student who had worked for her father. The union lasted barely 2 years, with persistent rumors that the marriage was never consummated. Divorce papers cited extreme cruelty, though the real cruelty may have been Huget's discovery that even marriage could not provide the sanctuary she sought. She chose to be known as Mrs. Huget Clark for the rest of her life, asserting an identity separate from her father's shadow. By 24, Huget had endured losses that would challenge anyone: her sister gone, her father dead, her marriage failed, leaving her with hundreds of millions of dollars, but no clear sense of purpose. Her fortune would not be used for grand philanthropy or social climbing. Instead, she turned inward, creating a world of miniatures offering the control and permanence denied by real life. The 1929 Corcoran Gallery exhibition should have launched Huget Clark into Washington society. 7 of her paintings were displayed. Critics praised her natural talent, revealing the copper heiress as a serious artist. Instead, she retreated further into her Fifth Avenue apartment, where a new obsession began. She collected 157 antique dolls, 600 Japanese, 400 French and German, each cataloged and maintained with scientific precision. These dolls became citizens of a parallel universe where Huget exercised the control she could not command in the real world. Her passion focused on French dolls from 1860 to 1890, particularly melancholy-faced jumeau Trista dolls and mechanical automata. One 26-inch jumeau doll later sold for $113,500, far exceeding original estimates. Childhood companions like Suzette, preserved in old boxes with their original clothes, commanded or $27,450 at auction. In the late 1950s, Huget commissioned Christian Dior to create haute couture wardrobes for her 19th century dolls, attending fashion shows in Paris to select designs for her silent companions. She also commissioned historically accurate miniature temples, castles, and tea houses from Japanese master artisans, including a temple that required special government permission and cost ADD. Thousand in the 1940s, roughly 4 million today. Elaborate tabletop dioramas depicted fairy tales, religious figures, and military forts, with German craftsmen constructing miniature theaters with painted scenes. Dedicated staff maintained the collection, ironing tiny clothes, repairing delicate bisque faces, and managing storage systems. Pearl Harbor transformed Huget's Japanese doll collection from eccentric hobby into a federal security concern. Black sedans and stern-faced agents visited her Fifth Avenue door, investigating purchases of Japanese art and miniature buildings requiring imperial permission. Despite months of interrogation, nothing subversive was found beyond her genuine fascination with 18th-century Japanese culture. The experience marked a turning point. If the government could view her innocent collecting as suspected treason, what other betrayals might the world hold? By the 1950s, Huget had ceased visiting her mother's 23-acre Santa Barbara estate, explaining that it would sadden her without her mother. The estate remained perfectly maintained but empty for 60 years. When Anna Clark died in 1963, Huget's last connection to the outside world was severed, leaving her alone with her dolls and memories. For nearly 3 decades, she rarely left her Fifth Avenue apartments, creating a hermetic world where hundreds of dolls provided the companionship human beings could not. In 1991, at age 84, routine treatment for basal cell skin cancer evolved into a permanent choice. Huget remained in her hospital room at Beth Israel Medical Center. Recovered, she valued the hospital's controlled environment, routine, and professional boundaries, moving many beloved dolls to the hospital to recreate her Fifth Avenue sanctuary. For 20 years, she paid approximately $400,000 annually for the privilege of watching cartoons surrounded by dolls. Her routine included 12 hours with a private nurse, endless loops of the Smurfs, the Flintstones, and Scooby-Doo, and regular deliveries of Barbie dolls. Despite owning empty mansions worth hundreds of millions, she found more comfort in a hospital bed than in any grand room her father's fortune had purchased. Beth Israel's staff quickly recognized her extraordinary wealth, while a 20-year campaign to extract portions of her inheritance unfolded. Her nurse, Hadassah Perry, received over $31 million in gifts, including 5 homes, jewelry, a $200,000 Bentley, and a $1.2 million Stradivarius violin. Doctors collectively received $3 million, and various nurses received hundreds of thousands, transforming medical care into something resembling elder abuse. Through it all, Huget remained mentally sharp, making deliberate choices with the same care she once used to select Dior designs for her dolls. While she spent 2 decades in her hospital room, 3 magnificent properties stood frozen in time like life-sized dollhouses waiting for an owner who would never return. Her Fifth Avenue apartment remained meticulously maintained, but unoccupied, filled with hundreds of dolls positioned exactly as she left them. Le Beau Chateau, a 52-acre Connecticut estate purchased in 1952, was never lived in, a $60 million property existing solely to exist. Most haunting was Belos Gardo, the Santa Barbara mansion, with cars in the garage sporting 1949 plates, furniture under covers, and dining tables set for guests last visited during Eisenhower's presidency. In 2005, at age 98, Huget signed 2 radically different wills within 6 weeks. One bequeathed her fortune to 21 distant relatives she had never met, descendants of her father's first marriage. The other established an arts foundation at Belos Gardo, leaving $30 million to her nurse Hadassah Perry and substantial bequests to her attorney, accountant, and hospital staff. When Huget died on May 24, 2011, 2 weeks before her 105th birthday, relatives were barred from her funeral, sparking a fierce legal battle over her $400 million estate and the fate of her doll collection. Relatives challenged the later will, claiming that a woman who lived in a hospital room watching cartoons while her mansions sat empty lacked the mental capacity to make such decisions. The defense maintained she was mentally sharp, merely fearful of the outside world. A 2013 settlement awarded relatives $34.5 million after taxes, while Bellos Gardo became an arts foundation, and Hadassah Perry returned $5,000 million but retained most of her $31 million in lifetime gifts. In January 2020, Terry Old's auction house dispersed Huget's legendary doll collection at the Santa Barbara Ritz-Carlton, attracting collectors worldwide. Her 26-inch Jumo doll sold for over $100,000, while childhood companions exceeded estimates by 30 times. A selection of historically significant pieces remains at Bellos Gardo, now open for limited public tours. Visitors encounter a preserved mansion and Huget's miniature world, walking through rooms frozen in time, seeing dolls in dire couture and miniature Japanese temples. Huget Clark, the last Gilded Age heiress, lived as though $400 million could buy everything except what she truly craved, the ability to stop time and inhabit a perfect, controllable world of childhood, where solitude and miniature perfection replaced palaces, parties, and human companionship.